Happy Sunday, everyone! In today's ThinkScript tutorial, we're going to be building our very own rate of change indicator. Now, the rate of change indicator is something built inside of ThinkOrSwim. We're going to take that as our baseline and make it a bit smarter. Now, 3 caveats before we get started with the coding piece of this. Number 1, so far this is mostly an idea in my head that I'm looking to translate into code. That means I have no idea if this actual indicator is going to provide us with an edge or anything of that sort. This video is more around the process of taking an idea and translating it into code, less about creating a quote-unquote game-changing indicator. Number 2, unlike most of the tutorials that we typically put out on this channel, this one is not rehearsed. It's the first time I'm building it, so that means most likely there will be some bugs along the way. We'll fix those bugs. I think it should be an interesting opportunity to walk through how to fix them. We'll be using things like the add chart bubble code if we get stuck along the way, but keep that in mind. This is not going to be some perfect tutorial that takes you from A to Z. There'll most likely be a slightly more squiggly path to actually get to the final destination. Finally, number 3, like I've mentioned, this is not some game-changing indicator. This is more so to walk you through the process of taking an idea that you have in your head and translating that into some simple ThinkScript code, especially if you're leveraging something like built-in TOS indicators, the ThinkOrSwim ones. If you have any questions along the way, or if you have questions around the own indicators that you're looking to build, feel free to send us an email, contact@tosindicators.com, and I'm happy to help wherever possible. Now let's move on to the planning stage of me at least sharing the idea I have in my mind. Here's a chart of Amazon. This is on a daily time frame chart, but this indicator should work on whatever time frame we're looking at, so that's, I guess, requirement number 1. I have the rate of change indicator as it's built inside of ThinkOrSwim here on lower panel number 1, and then I have the basic RSI indicator on lower panel number 2. The idea that I have is to take, first off, this rate of change indicator and turn it into a range-bound oscillator. What I mean by that is take the high and the low and create some sort of a range here that we can use to at least understand what is considered extreme. Once we have that, that gives us the ability to do things like, say, divide that range in half, where we now know that, hey, this range right up here or this range right down here are where the extremes are for the rate of change, at least compared to where it's historically been. Now we'll pay particular attention to things that happen in this range. So that's one example. This is one example. This is another example here. So that's the basic premise first. Turn this into a range-bound oscillator where we can then find extreme ranges, and we can use those extreme ranges to garner some information. That's where the RSI is going to come in, and we can use the RSI's built-in breakout signals to understand when does any one of the overlaps happen while the rate of change is in this extreme end. That's the basic gist of what I'm looking to build here. So some examples looking at just this chart of Amazon here. This would be one example that stands out. The RSI is giving us the breakout signal, the rate of change is in this extreme end, and if we take a look at what happens in price action, price ends up rallying from that point in time. Essentially, in layman's terms, what we're saying is the rate of change is now slowing down in terms of going from a negative rate of change to now slowly transitioning to a positive rate of change, or at the very least, not declining as rapidly. And the RSI is telling us that we're officially now in oversold territory, and we're making a move away in the bullish direction in this case. So this is example number 1 of what I'm hoping this indicator can help us identify a lot faster. Another example, this is a bearish example. Same idea, we're in the extreme end, we get the RSI breakout signal to the bearish side, and we have price action pulling back just a tad bit. That's the goal of what we're looking to find. 2 more examples to help you familiarize yourself with this. Next example, another bullish one, same idea. We have the RSI signal, we have the rate of change in that lower extreme end of the range, and we have a small bounce in price action. And then finally, the last example we can touch on is right next to it. Another very similar example inside of Amazon. This was the relief rally not too long ago inside of Amazon, and the rate of change here well below the extreme end along with the RSI signals. So hopefully this illustrates what we're looking to build. Now it's time to start writing some code and turn this into a reality. Now once you're inside of your ThinkOrSwim platform, click the studies icon, and search for the built-in rate of change indicator. This should have a scroll icon with a lock next to it. Click that scroll icon, copy paste all of the code inside, and then come back and click Create on the Studies menu. Inside of this code field, delete anything inside and paste in that rate of change code to get started. This gives us a nice leg up. ThinkOrSwim has already created the ROC calculation, so all we need to do now, at least for the ROC piece, is coming back to the planning, add in the range bound stuff to essentially get the highest and the lowest values, and then some value in between which allows us to know what this extreme range is. So coming back inside of our platform here, let's start with doing that with maybe capturing the highest and the lowest point first here. So there I'll say plot highest ROC, so this is going to be the high bound of this value, or the highest point for the range, excuse me. And there we can use the highest all function and plug in the ROC value that ThinkOrSwim has already calculated for us. We can also repeat something similar for the lower side, so lowest ROC, lowest all ROC, and then close that out. Now once we plot this, let's see what we have first off to begin, and I'll give this a name. I'll call this TI_ROC. Click OK, apply to our charts. So what we have as of right now is a line that marks the lower point of the ROC indicator along with the higher point. Now let's go ahead and take the distance between the lower point and the 0 line, divide that in half, and I think that should give us our extreme end. So there we can say something like midpoint, so I'll call that plot midpoint, and let's actually start with the highest one first. So midpoint highest ROC, that's going to be this highest ROC variable divided by 2. The actual formula would be highest ROC minus 0, so that's still highest ROC, and then divide that by 2. So we're skipping the minus 0 piece. Repeat the same thing for the lowest ROC value. So lowest ROC, and then we can change this variable here to lowest ROC divided by 2. So as of right now, once I click apply, what we should see, if this is all worked out as we expect, we have these two lines for the highest and the lowest. Now we'd like to see another line dividing this in half. Let's see if that happens. All right, perfect. So now we have some sort of measure of what our extreme range would be. Let's clean up these lines so they look a little nicer in terms of pure formatting, and then we can move on to gathering in the RSI indicator and then finally creating the signals. So for the formatting here, I'll start with the highest ROC first. My goal is to make this line red, I think we had, right? If I come back to our example. So the top line is going to be red, the bottom line green. The middle two lines are going to be dashed instead of solid with lower degrees of color. So lower light red, lower light green. So coming back inside of our code here, I'll say highest ROC dot set line weight first to make it a little bit thicker, and we can set that to a weight of 3. Do the same thing for the lowest ROC, so set line weight, set that equal to 3. Once I click apply, you should notice the outer lines become just a little bit thicker, so that allows us to know that this is range bound, or I think it's just a little cleaner. Now let's add in the color, so highest ROC dot set default color, and we had the highest one as a color dot red, so I'll set that equal to red. Lowest ROC set default color, color dot green. Let's see how that looks so far. So that's the red and the green that we were looking for. Now we have the midpoint that we need to make some adjustments to, so let's bring that in. Start with same the set line weight here, except in this case this is going to be a weight of 1. We'd like to make this a little bit skinnier. Same thing for the midpoint lowest ROC, set line weight 1. Perfect. And then now we can also start by making this a dashed line instead of a solid line. So I'll say midpoint highest ROC dot set style, and there it's going to be curve dot short underscore dash, and this makes this a dashed line instead of a solid line. And then I repeat the same thing for our lower side, so midpoint lowest ROC dot, and then we can copy paste all of this and paste it in one more time. Okay, so let's see where we're at as of right now. That's given us the dashed lines that we're looking for. These colors I think are getting set by default, so if we add in some code to make sure it always stays that color regardless of what platform you're using this on. So let's say midpoint lowest or highest ROC first, dot set default color, and there we can make this a slightly lighter shade. So I'll say light red, and then midpoint lowest ROC dot set default color dot light green. Click apply. And now if we compare this to what we were looking to build, so we have the dashed line, we have the range bound pieces, we can also mark the extreme ends on both sides. I think more or less we've accomplished turning the ROC indicator into some sort of a range bound indicator where we can now determine what this extreme end is and this extreme end is. Now let's define those extreme ends first. So let's say def extreme end high, or let's just say extreme high rather, to keep this cleaner. And there, that's going to be ROC is less than the highest ROC, and ROC is greater than the midpoint of the highest ROC. And here, if we test this out by saying add chart bubble, we'll say only plot this bubble whenever extreme high is true, plot it at the ROC value, plot the extreme high one more time, and show me a yellow chart bubble. What we should see is a yellow chart bubble only whenever this condition is true, meaning we're inside of this range. Let's see if that's what happens here. Okay, so we're seeing so far, if I click OK, that this chart bubble is telling us whenever we're in the upper extreme end. So we know we've been able to successfully identify that area. Let me comment out this add chart bubble code and repeat the same thing now for the extreme low side as well. So I'll say def extreme low is equal to, in this case, ROC is greater than our lowest ROC, meaning we're above this green line, the solid green line, and ROC is less than the midpoint lowest ROC. And one thing we may want to change here is make this greater than or equal to, and less than or equal to. That way it's including that line as well. Now that we have the extreme stuff working the way we would expect it to, we can now move on to the next step, which is bringing in the RSI indicator's signals. For that, if I click OK, let's start by searching the built-in RSI indicator. That's right here. If I open the code for that, instead of copy-pasting the code for the RSI, we only need to reference one or actually two of the plot variables, and that's right here. The up signal, which occurs when RSI crosses above oversold, and the down signal, which happens when the RSI crosses below the overbought region. So both of these two signals are the ones that we're going to care about, up signal and down signal. So keep that in mind. We'll reference that when we get to the code. So coming back inside of our ROC code now, if I come to the bottom, let's start by creating the RSI up and down signal separately inside of our code right here. So there I can say RSI up signal is equal to RSI. So this is us calling the study. We put a period to know which plot we're trying to reference. And there, this is going to be the up signal. It's as simple as that. Now for the RSI down signal, so we can change this to down signal, and then also change the variable name. And now, of course, we will test this to make sure this lines up with what we would expect. So let's put RSI up signal as the condition that must be true. We can plot that still at the ROC value so we can see it on this lower study. The value inside that I'd like to plot is the RSI up signal. Click apply, click OK, and then we also add in the RSI here. Make sure breakout signals is set to yes. Click OK and apply. Now what we should see if this worked is every time we have this green arrow, we also have the chart bubble. So that's true here, that's true here, that's true here, here. So we know that we've referenced the up signal correctly. Now if I come back to our code, let's remove the RSI, apply, go back into the ROC code. Now we know that we have both the up and the down signals referenced inside of this code. Now comes in creating our rate of change up and down signal. So for that, we can say def ROC up signal, and the ROC up signal is going to be whenever price action is in the extreme low, so that's condition 1. We want it to be inside of this range. After that, well, that's condition 1, we can say and, add some parentheses here, and inside of that we can say ROC is greater than ROC1. That means the value is increasing compared to the previous value. First, let's test what this looks like here. So if I turn this instead to a plot variable, and then let's say up or ROC up signal dot set painting strategy, and there our painting strategy is going to be arrow up. And then I can make one quick change here while we test this, which is if this condition is true, then return the ROC value, else double dot nan. So that way we can see the arrow plotting on this lower panel. So if I click apply, we see nothing plotting as of right now in this narrow window. So let me expand this to see. Okay, so we do start to see that plotting as we get below the extreme end, and that arrow points every single time the ROC rather is on its way up. The rate of change is increasing. Now we know that that is working correctly. So if I come back in to our code, the next thing we can do here is create the down signal as well. So I'll say plot ROC down signal. There, if extreme high and ROC in this case is less than the previous ROC, then we're going to return the ROC value. That's just so it plots in the right destination. Remove the if and the then part of this code before we move on to combining all this. This is just for testing. I'm going to take the ROC down signal, plug that into the same painting strategy, and this time change this to down to confirm this is working correctly. Click apply, and we can also see the arrows plotting every time we're in the upper extreme end, and the ROC is declining, meaning it's not in the same period as it was in the increasing phase headed up to this extreme region. So now, just a quick recap before we combine the final pieces of the code. We've been able to identify the RSI up and down signals. We've created our own set of ROC up and down variables, which tracks when the rate of change is no longer increasing or decreasing, but is rather reversing the trend. And we've also been able to identify the extreme regions on both sides of the ROC indicator. Now we combine all of these pieces for our final plot values. So now for that, we can come back inside of our code, change this plot variable to a def variable. Oops. Def, we can delete this bottom line of code. And we can also start to delete the whole else, then, if statements, because all we care about is, are you in the extreme high, and is the ROC, in this case, declining compared to the previous bar? That's the only condition. We want this to be a Boolean value. So for that, I can remove all of the code headed up until there. Okay, repeat the same thing for the ROC up signal, and get rid of the if statement. So this is just going back to keeping our code a little bit cleaner. And now we create our final plot variable, which is going to be our signal. So here I can say bull signal. Our bull signal is going to be true anytime we have ROC up signal and RSI up signal. Fairly simple since we've broken this out into two separate pieces. For our bear signal, ROC down signal, and RSI down signal. And then now we can make sure we plot each of these as the same set painting strategy dot arrow up. And I believe we're actually going to need to add in the whole ROC value, otherwise it will just plot at 0, as you can see the arrows right here. So let's go ahead and fix that there. The same trick we just used for the RSI, so I'll say if both of those conditions are true, then return this value, or plot it rather, at the ROC, else double dot nan. A little bit of rework here. And then if this condition is true, then ROC, else double dot nan. And now if I click apply here, you should notice all of these bull signals should drop where the ROC value is actually true. So if I click that, Now we can see only the arrow plotting whenever the two conditions are true. Let's go ahead and change that color to so it's easier to see. Bull signal.set default color, color.green. That should make this a little bit easier to stand out, and we can also make the arrow just a tad bit bigger. So I'll say bull signal.set, I believe it's line weight 3. Might just be set weight. Let's see if this works. Okay, set line weight still works. Okay, cool. So we have our bull signal. Now we repeat the same thing for our bear signal as well. And that should bring us to the end of the code. Then we can do some final testing to see how this is all working out. Bear signal, change the color from green to red, and change the arrow from up to down. Click apply. Okay, apply, okay. Now we have what I think is our final ROC code. If I zoom out just a little bit, we really have on Amazon 2 sets of signals that are plotting, unlike what we had seen on our full chart. So let's take a look at why that's happening. Here we have the signals being true while they're still in the extreme end and still in the extreme end on the lower side. The earlier signals we had, that started to reverse, and I'm guessing the RSI value and the ROC value weren't lining up till we crossed below that extreme value. So let's focus on these two that we have here. Let's switch this to a 5-minute chart, see if this still works on the intraday basis. So on the 5-minute chart, we're still seeing the arrows plotting, right? The way we would expect. And let me load in the RSI here as well, just so we can confirm alongside. So we should see this green arrow plot every single time we have an RSI as well, and the rate of change is increasing. So as of right now, this is working the way we'd expect. I think we may have slightly more tighter restrictions, where for those of you looking to try and capture something like, say, this point right here, the way you could go about adding another bearish arrow to capture that is keeping context in mind here. That's, has the RSI crossed above the extreme region and is now turning below, where, say, that turning below may be true below the extreme end. That's okay, since we have the context to know we did cross the extreme end. So context here is how we could add the additional signals. I think that may be for a separate tutorial, but in this particular tutorial, what we were able to achieve is marking the extreme end from the ROC indicator, dividing that into regions where we can actually identify the extreme region, creating our ROC up and down signals, which tracks whenever the ROC is reversing, and combine that with the RSI indicators breakout signals, which are already built in, the bullish and the bearish signals inside of the RSI. Once we combine all of them, we're left with this version of the ROC indicator that we created in this code, which is tracking whenever those two are true, along with the extreme end, giving us some very simple bullish and bearish signals that works across multiple time frames, across different markets. Whatever you may be looking at, we were looking at Amazon this entire time. You could switch this over to something like the S&P futures, and you should notice the indicator still continues to plot as we would expect. Again, I gave you some ideas for ways that you can expand this tutorial if you'd like to make it a bit more robust or maybe a little bit less sensitive, and even add in things like a sensitivity factor, which might be other ways to improve upon this. I hope you found this indicator tutorial to be useful for those of you wondering how to take a basic built-in ThinkOrSwim indicator and turn it into something a little bit more useful that may be geared a bit more towards your personal trading style. Take care, everyone. Good luck trading and navigating this volatility, and we'll see you in our next ThinkScript tutorial.